I went through being raped once or twice a month to having a knife held in my throat, a gun being poured in my throat. I got a scar on my hand, can't really see it, but a guy tried to slice my throat and I took the knife from him and I stabbed him back. To this day, I don't know if he's dead, but I don't care because he was trying to take my life.
Once people hear the stories, then they get a sense of the harm. But until they do, it's all a very intellectual argument, and it doesn't get beyond that.
And if you want to continue to believe that this is a matter for debate instead of an emergency and a time for action, I want to tell you how many women will die during the course of the debate that you would like to have.
Pornography is big business all over the world. In America, the industry makes huge profits from the sale of magazines, films, and videos, and its products are protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution. This means that any opposition to the industry can be seen as an attack on the right to free speech. For over 15 years, the New York-based writer Andrea Dworkin has sought to put the issue beyond the free speech debate. The argument which runs throughout her work, particularly in the book entitled Pornography, Men Possessing Women, is that the industry should be destroyed in its entirety because of the actual harm it does to women.
I think I started taking pornography seriously initially because women would come to me and tell me things that had happened to them, ways in which they had been sexually abused that had to do with pornography. And it was only when it was basically confirmed over and over and over again by the stories of so many women that I began to feel as if I know what I'm talking about. I know that this is real. I'm going to say this now.
Dworkin's commitment to these women has made her the most vociferous anti-pornography campaigner in the United States. She's attracted ardent supporters and made many enemies through her writing and the explosive speeches she makes all over the country.
When I go to a place and I speak about pornography, the first thing I have to do is to make the pornography real to the audience that's listening to me. Because if they don't know what's in it, then they have no basis for believing anything I say about it. And most people don't know what's in it. Even the men who use it don't know what's in it because they see the picture only through the sexual arousal that they feel. They don't necessarily see what's there. So I explain what pornography is being made now.
In the pornography that's made in the United States now, women are penetrated by animals and by objects. The animals include dogs, horses, eels. The objects are common household objects often. They include tools, telephones, so-called pistol hair dryers. Women are also penetrated by spiked dildos, by knives, by guns, with glass. For black women, their skin of black women is actually used as if it were a female genital. Things will be done to her skin to injure her, and she will be shown having a sexual response to the injuries to her skin.
I think that they think that I'm coming there to do it because I like doing it, or I get off on doing it, or it's some reason like that. And The reason that I do it is because we can't go further until they know it.
And the basic message of pornography is that no matter what you do to a woman, no matter how much you hurt her in whatever ways, she will like it.
In March 1991, Dworkin went to give a speech in Portland, Oregon. During the visit, cameras were allowed to record the conversations she had with a group of women who'd been involved in prostitution and the pornography industry. This provided a unique opportunity to show the real lives which are at the heart of Dworkin's arguments.
In Portland, I went to do a benefit for the Council for Prostitution Alternatives. And I went because they're one of the few groups in the country that does try to do anything to help women get off the streets, and at the same time is political. I knew that it would be very hard to talk about pornography for most of the women. The pornography is a concrete memory that never dies, that can follow a woman from her birth to her death. I found it a great honor that they were willing to speak to me, basically in front of cameras, for the sake of getting other people to understand what had happened to them.
My first memory was with an animal being filmed with my mother facilitating it. I guess in my mind at that point I swore that I would never trust women. I can never, just trying to forget it is like impossible. My first memory with a person, if you can call him that, with sex was my father, which at that point I swore I would never trust another male. So it leaves me to, I don't trust anyone. My next memory was when I ran away, the body ran away from home. And I had no idea what to do. I didn't know how to work. I didn't know, I mean, I don't even read. That wasn't my function. So I didn't learn it. And the thing that I knew best was pornography. And so I turned off all feelings and emotions and decided to go back into that, and I did. When we did film and we did good, we were appreciated. At least we were told that we were good. At least somebody acknowledged our importance. And to me, that was the good part, because now I'm living a life of non-prostitution. I don't do movies. I'm not doing those things, and I don't hear them, and I feel not important. I do still think that that's what I was created for. That's what I'm good at. That's what's going to make me healthy and strong. It's difficult. It's really hard.
There's an attempt to glamorize the making of pornography by treating it as if it's the making of films, you know, in the Hollywood sense of you're a star, you're beautiful, you're wonderful, that's great, kid. The reason that it works with some of the women who are in pornography is because of the roots of this sexual abuse in childhood. It's because when they're children, they're used by people who love them in the making of pornography, by people whom they love. I shouldn't say people who love them, by people whom they love.
I come from a life of poverty and hunger for kindness and love. I can't remember how old I was when my grandfather started molesting me, but he continued to rape me until I became pregnant at the age of 13. Then he called me a filthy whore, along with the other members of my family.
I remember one instance in particular where it kind of got started was Ray had a bathroom in his room, and one day we were in there taking a bath together. We didn't know that we were doing anything wrong. We were just kids. And we were in there taking a bath together, and we started playing around with each other. I mean, we were exploring and stuff, and my father comes in, sees what's going on, and says, okay, if you guys are gonna do that, you're gonna learn how to do that right. And then he proceeds to rape me in front of my brother, and then he turns around and he looks at Ray and he says, see, that's all women are for, and walks out of the room. I figured, okay, this is how men show love. You know, I don't remember one time where he ever said that he loved me, or one time where he just put his arms around me and said that he was proud of me for some achievement or something. And that's all I wanted. I just wanted him to be my father. That's all I wanted from him. I didn't want any of the other stuff that I got. I just wanted him to be my father, and I don't see why he couldn't understand that. I mean, that's all I wanted from anybody, was just a little bit of love and understanding, but that's not what I got.
One memory that I do have was one of my father at one of the film settings when and I have no idea why I said I wasn't doing it anymore, but I remember, this is hard. I remember my dad picking up a child that the body had, and the filming was in a building that was maybe 2 stories, because if I had jumped, it would maybe break a leg. And I remember him putting her out the window and said, this is your choice. And I guess at that point, I believed in my mind that if you didn't continue what you were created to do, other people would suffer, and people that you really loved. And so at that point, I swore I'd never like children.
Now, in families in which there is also poverty, and at some point or another, the child will run away from home, the child will leave home, and the child will find herself out on the streets knowing only one thing, which is that she exists in order to be used this way by the people around her, especially by the men around her. And pimps pick up children who have been hurt in precisely this way, because this is the ideal child to turn into a prostitute or a woman who will be in pornography.
St. Nick was a pretty big time pimp, and he got me first. He didn't have to teach me much, because my father had taught me most of what I needed to learn about pleasing men, and there was a little bit more that he needed to teach me. So he would show me these videos, and I would of different sexual positions and things, and I would copy on him what I saw was going on, was what they were doing in the videos. And that's how I learned how to be a prostitute.
People talk about pornography as a form of fantasy. They actually talk about prostitution as if it were an exercise in fantasy. And it is part of the pornographer's effort to hide what they really do in real life, to encourage the use of the word fantasy in place of actual behaviors that really happen in the real world. I mean, a fantasy is something that happens in your head. It doesn't go past your head. Once you have somebody acting out whatever that scenario might be in your head, it is an act in the world. It is real. It is real behavior with real consequences to real people. And so it has been a very brilliant part of the pornographer's propaganda campaign to protect pornography, to characterize the industry as an industry of fantasy, when in fact, when you have that Asian woman hanging from a tree, you have a real Asian woman, and she is really hanging from a real tree. And it has nothing whatsoever to do with fantasy. It has to do with a human being actually having happened to them what we see has happened to them. And I think that, you know, it's just the most extraordinary insult to the human conscience to continue to characterize these real acts to real people as if they only exist in the head of the male consumer. And what that means is that his head, his psychology, is more important than her life.
I've been involved in pornography all my life until 1987. I was gang raped. That's how I conceived my daughter. My daughter's career wasn't very long-lived. She was beaten to death by her trick. She used to get beat up a lot by tricks. I've often wondered if some of the physical damage that was done to her was simply that maybe a child's body wasn't meant to be used that way, you know. Maybe babies aren't meant to be anally penetrated by things or snakes or bottles or by men's penises. But I don't know for sure. I'm not really sure about that because that's what my life was.
The more I learned about sexual abuse in all of its forms, including incest, including prostitution, including battery, including rape, the more I understood that pornography was like the nerve center for all of these forms of abuse. It was kind of the Pentagon, it was the war room, where strategies of sexual abuse were both planned and communicated to a population of men who were going to go out and do them. And they were going to do them to women, and I was going to meet the women, and I was going to have to remember the women's faces and the women's voices and the women's tears and the women's stories for the rest of my life, so that it became impossible to dismiss, for me, the meaning of pornography in keeping women frightened and terrorized and insulted and second class. There was no way that I could hide from what its meaning was. No matter what we know about what distinguishes them as a population of women from other women, the fact of the matter is that nothing about their childhood or about them as individuals puts them in the pornography industry. The industry exists because of the pimps who make a profit off of their body and because of the consumers who want to buy them. And when we look at the real world, it's the industry, meaning the pimps and the consumers, who are responsible for the ways in which these women are abused. The current pornography industry really is rooted in the 60s. Initially, pornography was seen to be a vehicle of liberation simply because it violated laws. And the laws were associated with the repressive adult generation. And anything they tried to stop us from doing, we did. And pornography was part of that. And the notion was that what would emerge would be this free and loving and, again, equal kind of sexuality. Women in the counterculture were incredibly idealistic. I think women really for the first time began to see men as equals, and the problem was that men did not reciprocate. The pornography industry grew and grew and grew. I mean, these people got rich. They made a lot of money. And suddenly they weren't so anti-capitalist anymore. I mean, most of the guys, you can trace their histories back to the 60s. They were in some way or another part of the 60s counterculture scene. What they did was to take the sexual freedom that we had been fighting for, and they turned it into a profit-making, product-oriented, woman-hating industry. And at some point we began to notice, and it was the kind of disappointment that either forces you to cave in or forces you to rebel. A lot of women did cave in, but a lot of women rebelled, and those who rebelled became feminists.
I'm ripping this up for incest survivors and rape victims. This is what I have to say to Bob Guccione.
We are very much for free speech, and this is part of our expression of it.
Shortly after, Kraft was arrested by police for obstructing a sidewalk. She'd earlier said she wanted to be arrested to call attention to the problem of violent pornography.
I mean, I came into the anti-pornography movement from the anti-rape movement. And there was a time whenever I thought, pornography? What does that have to do with anything? I mean, you know, I was there. One of the things that I realized was that when you get backed into a corner like that and you don't have anything to lose, which is what you've written about so beautifully, the whole world's open.
In 1983, Dworkin tried to put her ideas into practice. With the lawyer Catherine McKinnon, she introduced anti-pornography legislation in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
We went to the city council and we said to them that pornography violates the civil rights of women, that the kind of hate in it leads to a kind of aggression against women and bigotry against women that keeps us from being able to be full citizens. And the City Council of Minneapolis said, can you write a law that says that? And we said we sure could, and they hired us to do it. The ordinance, as we call it, was an amendment to the city's civil rights law. And what the ordinance did was to define pornography in the simplest possible way. It said that pornography is the graphic, sexually explicit subordination of women to men.
The Dworkin-McKinnon anti-pornography ordinance would allow a woman who was harmed and who could prove she was harmed by pornography the chance to go to court and try and get some kind of legal redress for that. And it's a civil remedy, which would mean that she would possibly get some kind of damages, money for counseling perhaps, and attorney fees, things like that. But it's not any kind of prior restraint saying that pornography can't be made. And a lot of people get very confused about that. They just hear about it and right away they stop listening and they say that it's censorship and that it's banning books.
Because of how our city codes were written, in order for anything to go before the council, there had to be public hearings. And the other stipulation in our public hearing law is that everyone has to speak. So there was an open forum that anyone could come and talk about pornography and if they were for this idea or against this idea. And it was absolutely overwhelming what happened at the hearings.
A lot of people came forward, women who had been used in pornography, men who had been used, people who had been used as children, gay men talked about the harm that they felt due to pornography as well.
The ordinance passed another hurdle today, winning unanimous approval from the Council's Government Operations Committee.
What we will be doing here in passage of this is, whether it works or not, whether it fails in the years to come, we're, as a group, as a council, grabbing the foot of the tree and shaking the branches for the whole nation to let the nation know that the city of Minneapolis is concerned about pornography and what it does to women, men, and children in our society.
My own impression is that, as now drafted, there are very serious problems.
The bad news is that subsequently the mayor vetoed both times that the city council passed that piece of legislation. And the good news is that we absolutely changed forever the whole discussion about what pornography is in this country. For the first time, it was perceived that pornography was not a victimless field of entertainment.
The development of the civil rights ordinance against pornography in Minneapolis really brought in a kind of a new age for us in fighting pornography. And I think that's all of us, you know, those of us who are against pornography and those of us who are for pornography all live in a new world.
Freedom for women! Now! Freedom for women! Now! What do we want? Freedom for women! When do we want it? Now!
I like direct action politics. I like confrontational speech, the kind of speech that I use when I speak. I like being direct. I don't think women should tell coy lies in public. And generally speaking, I don't think that we're going to get anywhere by begging men to be nicer to us. I mean, I just see absolutely no point in it.
I will be expressing my disgust and my First Amendment rights against this establishment in a way that doesn't hurt a damn thing.
Since writing this book on pornography, I basically have had a hell of a time being able to publish in my own country. And then there are threats, and then there are the pieces that appear in all the pornography magazines specifically about me. They want me to stop. I mean, that's what it amounts to. They want me to stop. I wish I thought I had gotten in their way as much as they seem to think I've gotten in their way. My own opinion is that I haven't gotten in their way near enough. Writing the book Pornography was one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my life. Writing it meant having to look at the pornography and live with it for several years. The book has a lot of descriptions of pornography that are very flat and detailed and neutral in the sense that they just describe what is there. There is a lot of pornography, which is shots of various parts of women's bodies, especially the genitals. And people think that those shots are basically innocent. But in fact, the genitals are manipulated so that they're totally deformed and painted purple and standing up so that they look as if they're three-dimensional. Anything that is a characteristic of any woman anywhere in the world can be exploited in pornography. So that, for instance, you have pornography that uses pregnant women. There simply is no historical atrocity, including the concentration camps, including slavery in the American South, including the Vietnam War, around which the pornographers have not built these scenarios of rape and humiliation and injury, as if the person who was victimized is the person who asked for it and the person who gets sexual pleasure from it. So on the one hand, you live mired in this kind of insane social hostility that the pornographers spend a lot of money to keep directed at you. And on the other hand, you get the greatest reward that literature has to offer which is that people say, I read your book and it made a difference, it changed my life. I am now doing this, whereas before I was doing that, and I'm stronger and I'm braver and I'm going to be free.
What she's done for me, and what I think she's done for a lot of women, is given us words to describe our experience and an analysis for what happens to us that we didn't have before Andrea.
Thank you very much. Hello. Hi. Tell me how to spell your name.
I respect her as a writer and as a theorist and as a woman, and I think she's very brave to be doing what she's doing. And because I've spent some time with her, I also know that it's not easy for her to do what she does. You know, that would just as soon be at home writing instead of always out on the road giving these speeches, you know, time and time again, and facing all of this hostility.
The Prostitution Alternatives, Juanita speaking.
There are many threats of attack before speaking, sometimes.
And these are all locked, these doors? Okay.
I always take it seriously. And what used to be a mental attitude of, I have to do my best at this because tomorrow or tonight I could be hit by a car, now has become, this may really be the last time I speak because someone may be in the audience with a gun. I mean, I have been attacked on stage, actually, by groups of men at different times.
Okay, so there's another way of coming up here through the basement and getting back here.
The same as we were on this side.
And the same on that side.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't want anybody to be able to walk up behind me.
Okay.
Anybody. And if anybody does, I want them taken away. I mean, I want them out of there. I don't care who they are. I don't care what their purpose is, you know, what their reason is. I don't want them behind me.
Andrea is in town tonight. She's at the Northwest Service Center. The tickets will be available at the door. Oh, it'll be an interesting lecture. There'll be a question and answer period after where you can address questions to Andrea for your one-on-one questions. Okay, thank you for calling. We'll look forward to seeing you this evening.
We're back talking with Andrea Dworkin right here on KBOO 90.7 FM. And we do invite your phone calls at 231-8187. You can give us a call and talk with Andrea Dworkin.
Part of the problem that we have with culture in general, and especially a culture that is run by men and controlled by men, is that we can't get them to say what it is that's bothering them and what we're doing that's actually touching raw nerves. And they know. I'm not even going to go so far as to say they know we're right, okay? Because maybe we're not exactly right. But they know that the questions that we're asking and the problems that we're putting to them are real, and that they have some responsibility to try to address them. And rather than trying to address them, which requires enormous self-scrutiny and enormous commitment, they just say, well, you know, she's another crazy, she's marginal, her politics are too radical for me. Nobody believes this.
Pornography is used by men because men have a sexual experience when they use pornography. And the experience of this sexual pleasure is a physiological one. It's not an intellectual one. It's something that happens in the body. And orgasm is an incredible behavioral reward. And what pornography does is that it ties orgasm to inequality. What we're doing is saying that pornography is an institution that helps to socialize men to rape. And that without that kind of socialization, we don't take it as inevitable that men will rape. In other words, this is a belief in the possibility of real change, and that if you can change these institutions that fuse male sexuality with aggression and with hostility to women, that that men will not have the same kind of sexual pleasure in domination that they now have. People say, things are so bad, I can't even recognize the world that I live in. Why is it like this? And you have this, $10 billion a year industry just in the United States that does nothing but sell cruelty. And the bigger it gets, the crueler people become. And it makes me crazy because it didn't have to happen. And people are still not acknowledging that this is the reason that it did happen. Pornography is the reason that it happened. I don't believe that there is any meaningful movement for freedom without the women who are the most stigmatized women and the women who are the most hurt women, the most powerless women, the women who have the least in society. And I just don't understand what the value of the women's movement is unless it's a fight for the lives of all women. They look at the rewards, minimal as they are, that feminists have managed to gain for more middle-class women, and they say, so are you sacrificing us for those kinds of rewards, those economic gains that you're making, you respectable women? And I think that very often the answer is yes.
I wish that the system, the courts and, our judicial system that's supposed to be there to help would have done something earlier in our life. I wish they would have done something earlier in our daughter's life. And I wish they'd do something now.
I think the world sucks. It treats you like shit when it should be honoring you. I get angry. I get really angry. And when I've read things written by you, Andrea, I found home again.
I said, no, I can't do this anymore. I'm pregnant. I have a life inside of me. If it's a girl, I'm just breeding her, so she'll be a prostitute. I'm just breeding her so that she'll turn out the same way I did. I don't want to die when my daughter is 8 years old, like my mom did, and leave her to do the same thing. But I feel that with CPA's help, I've done enough to raise a child and not make her a prostitute and not make her a fourth generation. I have hope for her.
I think about my daughter and what her life was like, and it's like, it's just the way it was. It's just the way it is now. It isn't stopping. I have films of pornography that was taken of me from the time I was a baby until just a few years ago. I've wanted to destroy it so many times, but maybe there is a reason why I've held on to it, and maybe you're that reason.
The trafficking in women in this country, both on the streets in prostitution and in pornography, technologized prostitution, you see, where a white man is dignified by being called a publisher instead of a pimp, and can sell women many, 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 many more times than the non-technologized selling of an actual real person with physical limits to what she can endure. At some point she will die, and she does, she dies. But the picture can be sold forever. She can live forever. He can pimp her forever. And there are never enough pictures. Because, you know, there are already hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of them just in the United States. This trafficking takes place in an international context. Women are the largest cash crop coming out of Thailand. Asian women are being sold all over the world, beginning when they are children. It is a slave trafficking in women. We are told in the society that we live in almost as the golden rule. The golden rule in the United States is that we have free speech. The First Amendment was written by slave owners and by men who owned white women as chattel. Women were property. And the First Amendment does not grant you a right to freedom of speech. That is not what it does. It says that once you have spoken, the government shouldn't punish you for it. But suppose you can't speak because the conditions of your oppression are such that you can't speak. This country gives us lies and platitudes and tells us that we can say whatever we want to say. Well, we can't, because we can't get it heard, and some of us can't say it because we have been hurt too bad. We have been hurt. Now, what does it mean if 1 out of every 3 female children is sexually abused before she becomes an adult? She's supposed to jump out of the womb and start talking because she's only got a certain amount of time left? And if she doesn't make use of that time, the man who rapes her, who robs her of her sense of worth, of her sense of her own brilliance and beauty as a human being, what does it mean that in this society it is his rights that matter and no injury to her matters at all? What does it mean, and how the hell do we change it? We have a right to decide whether we want to use law or whether we want to use our bare hands. Right? If you know what it is that needs to be torn down, tear it down.
It's so hard to know that my friends are still there, and they're believing and thinking the same way, and I know how unhappy I am, and I know that's where they are, and I don't want them there. And other girls that are being born and living that life, I don't think it's fair. I think there should be more people that are taking them out and showing them that they are important and other things, and that that's not what they were born for, and that there's a better life. And if you don't get them when they're young, they're going to end up like me, where nothing anyone says they believe, and that's scary. And that's all.
This is not fiction. This is real.
freedom of speech for women begins with an integrity of the body that is true and real and honest and absolute. There are no exceptions. There are no exceptions for men who are privileged to invade, and there are no exceptions for women, which is to say, oh yes, you mustn't do it to that woman, but do you see her over there? Yeah, it's okay, do it to her. Nobody will miss her. We miss her. We want her back.